Welcome to NEDA's Excerpts from the Experts, 7-minute learning sessions with researchers and practitioners in the field of eating disorders and individuals who share their perspectives and experiences. I'm your host, Sarah Bowie-Keaton. This week, our guest is Dr. Carolyn Ross. She is an African-American author, speaker, and expert in the treatment of eating disorders, trauma, and addictions. She is board certified in preventive medicine and in addiction medicine. She is the author of 3 books, including the Food Addiction Recovery Workbook. Dr. Ross presented a TEDxPleasantGrove talk on historical and intergenerational trauma in January 2020. She is co-founder of the Institute for Antiracism and Equity that offers DEI trainings to organizations on diversity, anti-racism, and equity in the workplace. Today, Dr. Ross will be speaking about intergenerational trauma and eating disorders. Dr. Ross, welcome to our program. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's my pleasure.
Can you tell us about the connection between race and eating disorders?
Yeah, I think for most of my career, it was really thought by professionals that people of color really didn't have eating disorders. And that was explained by saying that, if I just focus on Black culture, that Black culture is more accepting of larger body size and so on. But the truth of the matter is there was no research until really fairly recently in, eating disorders in people of color. And when you look at the research, there's, equivalent amounts in both anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder, as well as some of the other RFID, et cetera. So we need to really put that myth to rest now, because that isn't the truth. The second thing is that I think, again, for many years in the eating disorder world, we denied that trauma had anything to do with eating disorders. And now, again, the research has supported that all eating disorders have their roots in trauma, whether it be in children, in teens, in adults, men, women, etc. And so trauma is much more common in Black and Hispanic children, for example, and even BIPOC adults are exposed to more trauma than are whites. So when you think about that, then if you think about the way that trauma manifests, eating disorder and addictions are both ways in which trauma can show up in your life as a way to cope with the effects of the trauma. And then finally, I think it's important to recognize that there is something called race-based trauma or racialized trauma. And this is something that Black individuals, Hispanics, or Latins experience on a day-to-day basis with microaggressions that are related to race, culture, ethnicity, and so on. So when you add in this race-based trauma, that can exacerbate either childhood trauma or adult trauma that is already highly more prevalent in BIPOC individuals.
Oh, you're so right. Thank you for shedding such a strong light on that. I appreciate the work that you're doing and researching and studying that. How can those misconceptions the general population have on eating disorders and race affect those who experience an eating disorder?
Well, I think within the Black culture in particular, there again is this notion that, Black women love being quote unquote thick. And there's, the original hip hop videos showed women of color with very, curvy figures and so on. So I think there are many people in our culture who still feel that whatever problem they're experiencing, it's not an eating disorder. And as well, there's a stigma associated with any mental health or behavioral health issue in most Black communities. And I think it makes it difficult for people to get treatment. There's also many, many barriers to accessing treatment, including being underinsured or uninsured. not having people of color as professionals or treating professionals in treatment facilities, just a complete lack of understanding of what BIPOC patients need and how their needs may be different from white clients. And then the interaction between clients can also be somewhat racialized. So there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and we have to start by, as you said, getting rid of some of these misconceptions. And I think the other misconception, which is prevalent throughout the eating disorder world, is that eating disorders are about food or even about body image, because it's not about the food. This is one of my favorite sayings. It's really about how we use food and how our body image stands in for the emotions that we are afraid to or unable to express or unable to cope with. And so that's something that's not particular to BIPOC individuals, but it certainly is a misconception in the eating disorder treatment world.
And so you did touch on this, but how can historical and intergenerational trauma contribute to developing an eating disorder?
Yeah, this is something I speak on a lot. And many times when that question is raised, people go, oh, why are we still talking about what happened in history? And I think it's important to recognize that history informs everything that we do and who we are. And I love Dr. Joy DeGruy's work. She wrote the book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and she really quantified in her research very, very specific traits that date back to slavery. And so these traits are manifestations of the trauma of slavery. And then those traits are passed down from generation to generation to generation. Now, even many people who are African American don't recognize that they may be exhibiting those traits, but they are. And so I think it's very important that we understand that trauma can be passed from generation to generation. And not only can it increase our risk for eating disorders and addictions, but for many other over 40 medical conditions, the top 5, like diabetes, heart disease, stroke, et cetera. And those are all very highly prevalent in Black communities, and even more prevalent in Southern Black communities where there was a huge prevalence of slavery. And so we're looking at the results of hundreds of years of enslavement of Black people, and how that trauma lives on even today. So I think historical and intergenerational trauma can really complicate the picture. And I think many clinicians are, let's just say all clinicians up until very, very recently, have not been educated about how historical trauma or intergenerational trauma can impact, Black patients or Latin patients, Indigenous patients. That's a whole nother, area of racialized trauma. And so I think it's really important that we understand, when we have a patient in front of us, for example, who fits the picture for the strong Black woman syndrome that, I've written about before, we have to understand, why is that person exhibiting or living from that point of view of feeling they have to be strong for everybody, feeling that they can't, share their feelings or open up, that they have to keep that wall. Well, there's a very good reason for that, and it dates back to slave time. So I think that's something that's really necessary for especially white clinicians to educate themselves more about and to understand how these trauma effects really can be passed from generation to generation.
Well, that's so interesting. I would imagine that even people of color don't even realize that they've taken on some of that traumatic traits from generations prior.
Yeah, and that I think that's absolutely true. And that was the reason why I wanted to do the TEDx talk, in which I talk about the gifts of intergenerational trauma. I think the big thing is that these trauma effects uh, can keep us from being completely authentic and completely happy, because happiness comes from authenticity, not from, making yourself smaller or making yourself less threatening, or whatever we think the dominant society is expecting of us. So part of the growth and the importance of healing from an eating disorder is so that you can be fully authentic. That's the ultimate goal. It's the ultimate goal shouldn't be, oh, that you just stop binging or you just stop restricting. The ultimate goal should be that you can inhabit, be embodied, be in your body, feel comfortable, and be fully able to express who you are as an authentic human being.
I like your holistic approach. Well, I really enjoyed this interview with you. What a incredible message, and looking forward to this getting posted onto our channel. Thank you so much for the work that you do and the education that you provide to broad audiences, and teaching us to acknowledge some of these issues and to be a part of the solution. So thanks again for your time today. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been my pleasure.
NEDA's mission is to support individuals and families affected by eating disorders and serve as a catalyst for prevention, cures, and access to quality care. NEDA offers programs and services designed to help you find the help and support you need. Whether you have been personally affected by an eating disorder or care about someone who has, recovery is possible, and we're here to support you.